Great. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome you to part 2 of the Everyone Can Garden webinar series addressing vegetable gardening for people with physical and other limitations. Tonight, we're going to be discussing planting your vegetable garden. 2 weeks ago, we met and we discussed planting your vegetable garden, had a fantastic presentation by our same presenters tonight. So I'm just out of curiosity, those of you who are here tonight, how many of you attended that session on March 18th? So I've got a poll for you. Did you attend part 1, planting your vegetable garden, on March 18th? A couple more seconds, a few more people to get to respond. Okay, great. 61% of you joined us last time and are back for more. Welcome back, and welcome to those of you who either didn't know about it, I know that's true for many of you, or were unable to make it. We're glad you're here. Next slide. I'm going to go over a few things before we dive into the content. All sessions in this 5-part series are being recorded. A link to the recording of the last session is available, but it's a temporary link. All of our programs will be available online via YouTube. And in a minute here, I'll put that link in the chat. So they take some time to be processed. So take about 2 weeks to get everything set up so that they are ready to go permanently on YouTube. But it's the CFAES, the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office's YouTube channel. There are some resources already on there that you might be interested in checking out, some webinars that we've put on recently. So please check that out and stay tuned for these videos to be stored there as well. So for tonight, you do have access to chat. Even though this is a webinar, you will not be able to access video or audio from your end, but use chat to engage with each other. Make sure that you select all panelists and attendees versus all panelists, because then it'll just go to us. And because there are quite a few of you on tonight, please use that to just interact with each other or when prompted, and use the Q&A feature to direct specific questions to us. So I see that there are already a couple questions, and we'll get to those. We'll try to address questions related to content as they arise or at the end of the session as time allows. And we've tried to incorporate answers to pre-submitted questions through the presentation itself. But if you asked a question and it doesn't get answered by the end of the session, please feel free to raise that question. I'm going to send to you a link to a survey. Please fill that out for us after tonight's session to give feedback. We've incorporated feedback from the last session into this session to improve it. So we do pay very much close attention to what you tell us in those feedback surveys. And then I'll be sending a follow-up email that will contain some resources. You should have received an email from me an hour and a half or so ago, reminding you of the session, containing the Zoom link to remind you of that. You had already received that, but just to make sure you had it nice and handy, and also a handout containing an overview, an outline of tonight's session. If you didn't get that, please let me know, and I will upload that here tonight. And then I'll also include a temporary link to tonight's recording. I also want to let you know that live captions are available. We have someone typing while we talk. To activate the live transcriptions, you just need to go down to the bottom of your screen, click that little up arrow at the live transcript, and select Show Subtitle. We have that available for folks who are have audio impairments. We're also going to be employing some strategies to make this content accessible for people who have visual impairments. So there might be times when this program feels like it's going a little slower, but that's because we're being very intentional to make sure that people with various ability levels can access the content. So for example, we'll be describing what is in a picture, because somebody who can't see might not be able to see the resolution that well and see the details in the photo. So please be patient with that process. We want to make sure that we're meeting everybody's needs. Next slide. My name is, should be Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Go back one. We're missing a slide. I'll just briefly say my name is Leo Taylor. I am the Program Manager for Faculty and Staff Affairs, and I work in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. This program is a collaboration between my office and OSU Extension, and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion aims to create and maintain an accessible, inclusive, and supportive community for everyone who works in CFAES, as well as OSU Extension, and then we also do provide services to the broader Ohio State University community. So welcome to tonight's program, and I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators, Laura and Pam, and they'll introduce themselves.
Laura, you're muted.
Thought I unmuted. Hi, I'm Laura Akgerman. I'm Disability Services Coordinator for Ohio AgAbility, OSU Extension, and CFAES, and I work on the CFAES office team with Leo.
Hi, and I'm Pam Bennett. I am Associate Professor. I'm also the State Master Gardener Volunteer Program Director, and currently the interim Chadwick, our Breed and Program Director.
So to tell you a little bit about Ohio AgAbility, our mission is to promote success in agriculture for Ohio's farmers and farm families who are coping with disability or a long-term health condition. Ohio AgAbility provides education and resources to farmers, agricultural businesses and groups, healthcare, education and disability professionals, and anyone who's interested in making farming safe and accessible. Our website is AgAbility, that's spelled AgRability.osu.edu. And we've also got some resources there. The link for that will be at the very end of the presentation.
And as Program Director for the Master Gardener Volunteer Program, I work with about 4,000 Master Gardener volunteers in Ohio, and the photos at the bottom of the page are some of the volunteers and some of the activities that they've been doing. It is a national program associated with extension offices and land-grant universities around the country, and volunteers who are interested in teaching their community about solid, good horticulture practices take training, 50 hours of training through the extension office, and then give back 50 hours of volunteer service to their local counties. And if you're interested, you can go to mastergardener.osu.edu and click on the county that you live in and find out about the program in your particular county. Leo has another poll for you.
Yeah, we're just curious about how much experience you have gardening. So for approximately how many years have you been vegetable gardening? Is this your first time and you're just getting started? Under 5 years, more than 5, but less than 10 years, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, or you're a pro, more than 30 years. And you could probably be teaching this webinar. Okay, last call. Yes, I love that attitude, Lorraine. You can always learn something new. And definitely as we age, our situation changes, right? So we have to look at things a little differently. All right. So we have quite a few people who've been gardening for a long time. That's wonderful. But also we have, a decent number of folks who are getting started or have only been doing it for a few years. So we hope we've designed this, I should say, my colleagues have been doing all the content design, have designed this program to appeal to a broad audience of people with various abilities, various disabilities, and also various experience levels. So we hope that you learn something valuable no matter where you are along this spectrum.
Okay, so we're going to start with just a real brief review of our last session on planning. You can still do some garden planning. It's not too late. Seed catalogs are still available. Garden centers are just kind of getting stocked up. So we talked a little bit the last time about site selection, good site selection, what to grow, the vegetables you want to grow for your family, preparing the soil, getting it ready for the garden, and then thinking about your options, decisions, and all the things that go along with deciding what to do in terms of a vegetable garden. And as Leo mentioned in the introduction, we will have the YouTube video available. Give it a few weeks. We have to prepare it and get it ready for everybody to view. And so when we have that, we'll make sure you have that link so that you can go and review the entire video. But in the meantime, Leo sent the link for the recording that you can review that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
So before we go out to the garden, we're going to talk about where do you store your supplies and your equipment. If you're lucky enough to have a garden shed in the garden, it's already right there. Not all of us are. I live in a condo, so my stuff is in the garage and I have to take it out and go around the side and around to the front, which isn't super long, but when I'm hauling a lot of stuff out, it's quite a bit. So we want you to think about if you can store supplies and equipment in or near the garden. I have 3 pictures up here. I'm going to start with the one in the center. It's an old mailbox. It's out next to a gate post and there's a lot of leaves and vines around it. I put that up because it's probably been 2 or 3 years ago. I was giving one of these presentations and someone said that their neighbor had put an old mailbox out in the garden and they had a fairly lengthy driveway. So they would walk to the end of the driveway to get the mail, get the paper, and on the way in or out, they would stop at the garden and they had maybe some little hand pruners or just a few little things that they kept in the mailbox so that they could just make an impromptu stop in the garden without having to carry everything in and out. And I thought that was so clever that if you have a mailbox or something else that you can put in your garden so that you can just store a few small things out there, it's really helpful. That would just help you with those little, I've got 5 or 10 minutes and I can go and do a little bit of gardening. On my far left, I have a picture of a bench. It looks wood, but it's actually that really hard rubber that you can put outside or plastic. It's kind of a dark grayish brown bench with armrests and legs that are charcoal colored. And the interesting thing about the bench is the seat of the bench opens up and it has a really good sized storage compartment in the bottom of it. So another place, you could put that bench in your garden and it can do double duty as a place to sit and relax. As a place, I just saw in chat right before I started talking that someone that watched it last time said she listened and she's taking breaks now. And I'm hoping that's working well. And I think it will continue to work well. But if you have a seating, like a place to sit, you can go out and sit and just enjoy your garden. You can, depending on the way your plants are set up, maybe sit and do a little bit of work. Might be a little harder from that bench, but you might be able to make it work. But it's a nice thing to combine some seating and some storage that you can keep out in your garden. And it's $174. I put prices on because I've often had people asking me for prices. And there is a handout. It's on the AgAbility website. And I'm also, it's in our shared folders if Leo wants to send it to you, but it's called the Garden Tools Equipment Handout. And I've got pictures of everything that I have in here, not that mailbox, but most other things, with a price and a link to where you can find it. I'm going to say first, Ohio AgAbility, me, Ohio State, we don't get any kind of, we're not getting endorsements, we're not getting kickbacks. I'm not even encouraging you to go to Amazon, even though I do go to Amazon a lot. I'm encouraging you to go to your local garden store. Here in Columbus, I go to Oakland Nursery a lot. But I wanted to give you an idea so that you think there was a set of shelves or a planter or weed tool that I wanted to look at. It's just a little prompt for you. So that's what that is. But I listed the prices. If you can find them for less, good. That's good. So my last picture is a set of 4 metal shelves. You may have seen these. I have a lot of these in my garden and my garage, and my utility room right now. And they come, I've seen them in 4, 5, 6, maybe 3 shelves, but it's shelves. It's got a wire, they've got wire shelves and they're adjustable. The things I like about those adjustable shelves, if you had a garden cart or a wheelbarrow, you could set one of those shelves so that's the same height as the bed of your garden cart or wheelbarrow. So if you brought something home that was heavy, I don't know, bag of mulch or soil or something, once you put it on that shelf, if you need to move it out to the garden, instead of lifting it up and turning and setting it down in your cart or your wheelbarrow, you can pull it straight off, which is a lot less strain on your back. So that's a nice thing about adjustable height shelves. Another thing I'll say is don't put things that you use often, keep on shelves that are between your knees and your shoulders. And that saves you a lot of crouching and stooping and kneeling. It also saves you a lot of lifting up over your head. I have some things on the high shelves, but they're things like Christmas decorations that we use once a year. They go up once, they come down once. So that's a good thing for a really high shelf. And again, I also put label everything. That's good for if you're an organized person and like to put things away. If you're a person who likes to reuse your Windex bottles or your any other kind of spritz bottle and you mix up some fertilizer or something in it, please label it so that you know what it is when you go back and you know that's not Windex in that bottle. And that just makes it safer for everyone to use. Next slide, please. So I'd mentioned lifting. So we're going to talk about safe lifting. I'm sure most of you have heard lift with your legs and not with your back. And I've heard that a lot too. I had a couple colleagues a few years ago who put together an excellent safe lifting program. Fitness for Farm Life was the overall program, but they did some videos, and I have pictures of them in just a minute, that they really did demonstrate what that means. It doesn't take a lot to hurt your back. It doesn't take things that are heavy. It's just twisting the wrong way to pick up your socks off the floor, or to, I have an elderly dog that needs help getting in and out of the car. And every time I boost her up, I think, oh, that's a lot of dog to lift into the car, but she's worth it. So when safe lifting, you want to start with a wide stance. Your feet should be shoulder width apart with your head in a neutral position over your shoulders. Neutral position is what it is. I'm sitting in a neutral position now. My head is pretty well centered over my shoulders. My ears are in line with my shoulders. My head's not jutted forward or not jutted back. It's just if you sat down and relaxed, where does your head naturally go to that's most comfortable? If I lean forward, if I lean back, if I jet my head out, I can feel it. So neutral is just where you go to. You want to keep the object that you're lifting close and in line with your nose and toes. It is really easy to hurt yourself if you're twisting. So if I have something on my desk right now and I wanted to pick up, well, I have a laptop, but if I wanted to pick up a big box full of flyers or brochures, instead of picking it up and twisting at my waist and keeping my feet pointed towards my desk, I'm going to turn my whole body. I'm going to turn my feet. My nose and toes follow each other. I don't twist and torque at the waist. It's a really easy way to hurt yourself. And you don't even have to be lifting something heavy to hurt yourself with that kind of a twist. So keep it in line and hold it close to your body. If you're holding it out like your arms are out at a right angle perpendicular to your torso, all of that weight is going into your forearms and up your arm. If you take that same big heavy box of seed or brochures or whatever, and you pull it up close to your chest so that your hands you're holding it against yourself with your body, with your hands holding it up to you, it feels a lot lighter. It's not lighter, but you're carrying it with your back and your torso, not just your arms. You want to use your stomach muscles and breathe out. So don't inhale on the lift. That's another good way. By breathing out, you kind of stabilize your core muscles, your stomach and torso muscles a little bit, and it helps to stabilize it. And again, I'm not saying that if you lift like I tell you, you're never going to pull your back, but I think you're going to reduce the chances of it. And then use the strongest part of your body, which is your legs. Instead of standing up, bending at the waist, reaching down and picking something up, it's a really easy way to hurt your back. You want to crouch down if you can. If you can't, there's a couple other ways we can do that. But mostly today we're going to tell you what, go to Fitness for Farm Life and look at the fitness videos and you'll see some different ways to lift. But you want to crouch down or get as low and as close to it as you can, pull it to your body and then lift it up. Next slide, please. And then we've got a poll here, which is the safe lifting technique. So you can see in the one picture, that is Leah. She is a doctor of occupational therapy now. She was finishing her doctorate when she did these, but she's one of the co-authors of our Fitness for Farm Life program. So A, she's standing up and she's leaning over at her waist, bent at the waist. She's kind of bracing her left hand on her leg, a little bit of a, not a squat, but she's squatting a little bit. Her legs aren't straight and she's got her right hand extended and she's ready to pick up a 5-gallon bucket. It's A. So B is she is crouched down. I don't think she's kneeling, but she's crouched down low to it. She's got both hands on the bucket and she's pulled the bucket up as close as she can to her knees so that when she actually does stand up, she'll pull it up with her. She won't hold it out in front of her like it's, something gross. She'll hold it close to her and kind of slide it up her body and hold it up against her torso. So we have one person that said A is the safe lifting technique. It's not, although 98.
We're still collecting answers.
Is it what?
Still collecting answers.
Still collecting. Oh, I gave it up.
Yeah, I'll end it now then.
But 99% of you got that the B, crouching down and pulling it to you. So thank you. That's good. That's correct. So don't lean over at the waist. Even if you have a little bit of a bend in your legs, it's still going to hurt you. Next slide, please. So you may think I don't pick up that many 5-gallon buckets, but I've got a picture here of Andrew. Andrew is he graduated with his master's in public health last spring, and he is the other co-author with Leah of the Fitness for Farm Life. So I'm going to move this over. In the A, he's standing next to a wheelbarrow full of straw, probably dirty straw, and he's standing at it and he's leaning over it. His back's curved, he's arched, he's looking down at that thing. He's not using his legs at all. That's A. B, he's standing behind the wheelbarrow, again, hands on it, and he's crouched down. So he's not crouched all the way to the ground, but actually, if you look at it, his knees are about in line with the wheelbarrow handle so that he could crouch down and then lift up. So which is the right one, A or B?
71% in. Get your answers in. Okay. There you go.
So y'all got that one right. Excellent. That's the way to do it. So remember, go out and practice that. And that's obviously those are two kind of very specific ways to lift, but crouch down using your legs, get as close to it as you can, keep your nose and toes in line and don't twist. Even if it's something really lightweight, you could still hurt yourself. Next, please. So we've talked about storing things. Now we're going to talk about how do you haul your equipment and supplies and plants out to the garden or back from the garden. I have a comparison here comparing garden carts and work seats. 3 of the 4 of these, you can see I have prices on 3 of the 4 of them, I think are really a good thing. The one that I don't like so much, if you have one of those, we also, Ohio AgAbility has one, and I have a few things I don't like about it. But I'm going to start on the far left. There's a rolling work seat. So it's a black padded seat. So we have basically a cart. It's got 4 pretty good sized wheels. There's a little wire basket in the front, and then it's got probably a 12 to 18 inch base to it. So it's not just an office chair with a post, but it's got a base to it. And then on that base is mounted a padded seat, and the padded seat has a padded backrest. Goes around about halfway around. And I don't know if you can really see it depending on the size of your screen, but the outside of the backrest has loops, like a tool belt would have loops. So you can drop your water bottle, your spray bottles, your tools into those loops. There's also a basket in the front, and then there's a basket under the seat, like in the base of the cart. So all good places to store your things. And then it's also got a handle that looks kind of like a little red wagon. It's a T handle. T on the end, but that's how you push it or pull it. And if you're actually sitting on that cart, you can use that handle like a rudder to steer. You would just kind of crab walk your feet and move it along, shuffle your feet along, but you can steer with that. I really like that rolling work seat. It is $115. It's not huge, it's not terribly small, but I think if it's something, if you needed to sit down and work, and there are definitely times I've seen pictures of this where somebody is bent at the waist and they're reaching down and weeding. I mean, if that doesn't bother your back and shoulders, okay. I personally would find that uncomfortable, but if you can't, it's better than standing up and stooping and leaning over. But this is also a really nice one if you're working with some fairly tall plants, or it's good for, you can sit down, something you can sit down and sit while you're working. It's a really nice seat. The next one is a little red, it's a red wagon. It looks like a red tractor seat. It is also on a cart. It has 4 wheels and it has a tray underneath it. It's a hard seat and no backrest. And the thing I don't like, which is fine, the thing I don't like it is that you have to crouch over it and push on the seat to move it around. We have this exact one at the Farm Science Review property. Ohio AgAbility bought it before I came along. And my first Farm Science Review, I was going to take it from our tent across the street to the Utzinger Garden to do this presentation at the gazebo. And I realized I'm going to have to walk past several hundred people crouched over this thing, pushing it. And no, I'm not doing that. So that is my complaint about that. If you could probably tie a rope around it and pull it along. I just think the padded one is a little bit nicer. Next one is a gray wagon. It's kind of shaped like a wheelbarrow. It's a wagon, it's got a flatbed, 2 sides, and then the front of it, at the front, it has big bicycle-sized tires, and it has a piece of wood, kind of the tailgate, I guess, or the flap. You would pull that up. So the front panel can be pulled up, or it can be kept in place if you want to hold things in there. On the driver's side of it, where you would actually operate it, it has 2 metal legs that come down. They're kind of U-shaped, they come down. So it's not just the 2 little spike pick legs that came down like the wheelbarrow that I grew up with. It has 2 U-shaped legs. And the best thing about it is it has a big U-shaped handle so that you can actually use it even for balance. It's a nice heavy one. If you needed a little bit for balance, you could put your things in there. You can grasp that handle on the side so that the backs of your hands are facing out to the side, or you could grasp it in front of you so that the backs of your hands are facing the sky. It does weigh 95 pounds and it carries up to 400 pounds. So my suggestion is if you're buying something like this, go to Oakland Nursery or wherever your nursery is. If they have this, try it out. And don't try it out empty, because you're not going to use it empty. You're going to use it with, I don't know, 50 pounds of potting soil or a lot of plants or tools in it. So put the things in it that you really will put in it and see if you can still push it around. See if you think, can I push it up a hill? If you have hills or little rises, am I going to be able to push it over a threshold? Is it going to be, it's a really nice one. It's just big and heavy. Make sure it's something you could realistically use, because $100, that's a big investment to me. The other thing I would say about this, personally, it would not fit into our garage, or it would, but then something else would have to be removed. It would take up a lot of room to store. I think it's a great wagon, but it's something to think about. Next one is it's a hot pink wagon, and it looks like a kid's little red wagon, except the pink is like a canvas fabric, like you might find on a suitcase or a tent. It has a metal frame around it, 4 good sized wheels, and it has a handle coming off the front of it like a kid's little red wagon. Weighs 20 pounds. It will fold down, it will collapse in and fold down. And it says it can carry up to 150 pounds. This thing would probably collapse down to maybe the size of a suitcase. So to me, it would be much easier to store. And it's $75. Next, please. So I've talked a little bit protecting your fingers, hands, and wrists. We have a video going here. This is another occupational therapist I worked with last summer. She's showing you a neutral hand position. So to save your fingers, you want to avoid repetitive use of your fingers, like a lot of pruning and squeezing, a lot of pinching. Do that for 10 or 15 minutes or until your hands gets tired, and then switch to another job where you're not doing that same motion. You want to keep your wrist and hands in a neutral position instead of twisting. Use the hand tools properly to reduce strain. And a neutral hand position is, again, just see how you're sitting right now. Unless your hands are folded, I'm sitting in an office chair and my hands are pretty relaxed. My thumbs are pointing up towards the sky, or maybe slightly towards each other and up. Back of my hands, if I was standing, just think how your hands would hang if you were just standing and you weren't twisting or thinking about your hands, they're going to hang by your side, thumbs forward or thumbs up. The most important thing to remember about it is look at your hand. You've got, when your forearm connects to your hand at your wrist, it has a bend to it. I don't know the angle. I'm not good at angles, but it has a slight bend to where your thumb comes up. Think about if you're holding a hoe or a rake or something else where you've got to extend your arm and you have to twist your hand so that there is a straight line from your wrist to your thumb because you're holding the rake or the hoe. Those kind of things can strain your hands. If you have to use it, but use it not very long. Switch out, be very, very conscious of the kind of twisting and torquing you're doing with those, because those can cause long-term damage. One of the questions we got was about carpal tunnel. I don't know that that will absolutely cause carpal tunnel, but I don't think it will help it. Also suggest using grippy gloves to hold tools without exerting your hands and wrists. Grippy gloves, they're on the garden tools handout that I mentioned before. The kind that I used to suggest that had a strap that would go over your hand to secure it in place, I cannot find them available, but I did find some that are just heavy garden gloves and they've got a nice rubber, like a rubber textured palm and fingers. And it makes it a lot easier. It's a lot harder it makes it easier for you to hold it without such a tight grip, because the friction of the rubber against whatever your tool handle is made of can help you hold it a little bit. You also, I suggest, use tools with spring action design or ratchet tools, like a pruner. I'm thinking of a hand pruner or a lopper, where the tool does all the work. I have a lopper that kind of jars my shoulders. Every time you take a big bite of something, you feel it all the way up your shoulders into your neck. That's not a good one. Something that has a ratchet that's got just a good hard bite where you're not being jarred by it would be really important. Okay, next, please. And then ergonomic tools. So ergonomic is designed to be held comfortably, let the body kind of be in a neutral position. So it works with your body instead of against it. They can be made with large, soft handles. There should be a depression or a ridge on the top of the tool, and they should be curved to fit the natural contour of your hand, with your wrist in a neutral position with your thumb on the top. I've got a couple pictures on here. Again, these are on the garden tools handout. On my left, I have three tools actually, a claw, a fork, and a little trowel. And instead of having the kind of handle that just comes out that you would grip regularly, they've got, I would call it a joystick handle, to where it's the tool that has a yellow handle that looks just like the regular one, but then it has a green handle coming up from that perpendicular. So you're holding it like a joystick. If that hopefully everybody knows what a joystick is, or you're holding it like you would hold a glass, I guess, upright. It has some curves in it where your fingers will fit. And then the nice thing about these, there's a third piece that goes along with this. It's a little cuff. It goes around your forearm and it has a bar that comes out of it. Each of these little green and yellow tools that I just mentioned, they have a little hole in the back of the handle at the opposite end of the tool, and that bar from that cuff goes into it. So there's a small inset picture, but it shows a person holding the fork. They're gripping the handle, and they've got it in that nice neutral hand position, like they're holding a glass, except they're holding the handle of it. And the forearm cuff is up on their forearm, and it gives a lot of stability. You don't have to stabilize it with your wrist. The bar on that holds it in place for you. Have another set. Those are $42 for the four pieces. Then we have another set of tools. These are ergonomic tools. They're green handles, and they've got a couple different shovels. It looks like a claw, and I don't know what the skinny one is. I think that's a weeder, but the handle comes out and it curves down so that you could again hold it. So it comes out and then at the end it curves down so that you could hold it in that joystick, holding a glass position. It does not have a stability bar that goes along with it, but I think those would be more comfortable to hold than like the kind of shovels where you have to probably kind of keep your arms straight in that exaggerated position where your thumb and your arm are straight. Next, please. So another thing is long handle tools, and these could be tools that you already have. So if you have hoes or weeders, rakes, shovels, those things are really good because they can keep you especially if you don't want, if you can't sit or stand or kneel while you're working, you can sit while you're working if you're sitting in a garden seat or you're in a wheelchair, a mobility device, or just a chair or stool that you carry out to the garden. You can work with those. You can keep your back up straighter. You can stand. They do provide more leverage because you're putting your body into it. You can use your back, your legs to get more. You can do a two-handed grip, which distributes the workload to larger muscle groups. So thinking of, we used to have horses when I was growing up, and you'd have to shovel the stalls, and you'd have the pitchfork or the shovel. You'd have to have a two-handed grip. I'm not sure how you do it one-handed, but two-handed grip, because that makes your legs and your arms work with it. And then ergonomic handles can be added for ease of use or comfort. Next, please. I have an example here of an ergonomic handle. It's $10 at Amazon, which is a heck of a deal because I got a different brand a few years ago. It was $25. This particular handle, it looks like it's red. This one is, and it's shaped just like the end of a snow shovel when you have that D handle, except at the base of this one, instead of being attached to the tool, it has, it looks like a little mouth that you would stick the pole of that rake or shovel through, and then you would tighten it with screws. So you would hold it in place like that. The idea with this, so we have two pictures on here, and it shows a person using a rake, and they're leaning over, their back is curved. They've got one hand out straight, about midway up the rake, and the other hand, you wouldn't be able to see it, but it would be holding the very end of the rake. But their arms are straight, their shoulders curved, their back, and then there's an X-ray behind it that shows a spine that's torqued over to the side, which is not good. On the right, it shows the right way to do it, the way we like it with this particular type of handle. The person's standing up pretty much straight. They've got the ergonomic handle attached about mid, or say 2/3 of the way up the rake handle. And they've got their, looks like their right hand. So if they're right-handed, their dominant hand is on that one, and they're holding it. And so this allows it so that the back of your hand is facing the sky. It's a comfortable way to hold it. You're not leaning forward, torquing your arm and shoulder out of place. And then they're standing upright, and their left hand is holding the end of the shovel or the rake. And you could get two of these if you found it was helpful. You could put two, one 2/3 or wherever on the way up, and one at the end so that you could hold it. One thing about these handles, I suppose you could take it off and put it on a different tool. I would think after time it would probably strip out the threads of the thing. So I think I suggest buying one for each tool that you need it for. Next, please.
It's a great idea, Laura. And I have to share with you, as I was weeding my garden this weekend, sitting on my bench, weeding by hand, I was twisted and doing some contortions, putting stuff in the basket, and you were on my shoulder saying, don't do that, straighten up. So just raising that awareness of what you're doing and making you think about it has just been fantastic. So I really appreciate that myself. So we're going to go on now to a small section here on the actual planting. So you've prepared your beds, you've got your garden ready to go, you know what you're going to plant. Recommendations you will see in some texts will say, don't plant on a cloudy day. Pardon me. Now let me explain that. Or don't plant on a sunny day, rather. You know, when you purchase those little tiny 4-inch packs, or even smaller, 3 in a pack, they have a small root system, and you put them in the ground and it's really sunny, hot, and windy out. All of a sudden they start to wilt. And they wilt because those roots have not established and can't take up water. Even though you might have watered thoroughly and the soil and area around that root system is wet, it hasn't been enough to establish to get that plant to take up the water. Into the evening, when it starts to cool down again, the sun goes down, they perk back up. So if we get several, really hot sunny days in a row, I just want you to be aware, because when it comes time to plant, if it's sunny and hot, I go ahead and plant. But I also know that I might get a little bit of wilting for the first few days, and then eventually it's going to start digging in, growing the roots, and start growing just fine. The other thing is, you don't want to get to the garden center and look at a pot, a 4-inch pot, and see flowers and fruits on it and say, oh, I'll get this one because I'm ahead of the game. You don't want flowers and fruits on your vegetable plants, except for If you're buying those big pots where they're growing them really early in the season, they're putting them in a big pot and they're getting them ready early so that they do have flowers and fruit on them. That's different. You know, those are big pots, lots of root space. They started them early enough. They've been fertilizing them. You can use those and go ahead and plant those. You don't have to take off all the tomatoes or the flowers. But in your little starts, the little 4-inch containers or 3 in a pot, you want to go ahead and make sure you get really healthy, small, young plants so that they can get established. And then if you're planting them from containers, make sure you put them in the proper depth. You know, tomatoes have roots all up and down the stem. And if they're tall and lanky, you can plant them deeper. You can plant broccoli deeper, but you can't plant peppers deeper than what that layer is for the soil and the soil surface in the pot. If you do peppers deeper, they're going to rot. So when you get ready to plant, make sure you read the label and it tells you plant just right at that soil level. Or if you can plant them deeper, learn more about that particular individual plant, like I mentioned with tomatoes and broccoli. When you're planting seeds, I mentioned last week about cool crop, or the last time we talked, cool crops and warm crops. Our cool crops can go in the ground now. The soil temperatures are still in the like mid to upper 40s in some cases, and up north it might not be even as high as mid to upper 40s. So cool crops can go in, they take cool soil, they're fine. Warm crops like tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, wait until mid-May or the end of May when that soil starts to warm up, and they'll be okay to go ahead and plant. When you're planting seeds, read the label on the proper depth as well. Seeds are the source of food until that plant, that seedling, gets up above ground and starts photosynthesizing and bringing nutrients and sugars down into the root system so that plant can grow. So that little seed has enough food in it to get it up and growing and to start growing true leaves, and that's about it. If you plant a tiny lettuce seed, for instance, or the turnips that you see here, way below ground, 2 inches, 4 inches, they're not going to grow far enough up to get above that soil and start photosynthesizing. Now, the squash that you see on the right, those seeds are a little bigger. They can go a little deeper. So a general rule of thumb is the smaller the seed, the closer to the surface. And when it comes to like spinach, radishes, things like that, I'll just sprinkle them on the ground, kind of lightly rake them in and cover them with about a 1/4 inch of soil. And that's perfectly fine on planting depth. But if you have something like squash, those can go about 1 inch in depth. In this example, we're planting seed potatoes, and seed potatoes go a little bit deeper. They go around 4 inches because there's more storage. If you look at this seed, this potato, there's a lot of sugars in there, a lot of storage for that plant to grow, so they can go even deeper. And in this case, we had a row dug up, we dropped the seed potatoes in, and then we covered it with soil on top of that. And Laura's going to talk a little bit more about these, but I happen to have a picture of one of our volunteers who was using a long-handled trowel to be able to plant and raise bed because she couldn't lean down, couldn't lean over and get down on her hands and knees. Another option is what's called a seed tape. If you don't have transplants or you don't have the seeds, a seed tape is really good for those of you who might have problems with dexterity. You can see right here, this happens to be beets. And they are laid out on this seed, and they're sort of kind of glued on there, not really glued, but they're stuck to that seed tape. And then you dig your little trench and you lay that seed tape down in there, and then you cover that up. And now you're handling a larger piece of paper as opposed to a really tiny seed.
So my next is about planting seeds without bending. Pam had just shown you that one of their volunteers was planting potatoes, I think it was, and also the seed tape. So I was doing some research, and I've heard from some other people who work with people with mobility or intellectual disabilities. They use a PVC pipe seed planter. This is not going to work for every type of seed, and it's probably going to depend a lot on your soil. But basically, they do just what it sounds like, a piece of PVC pipe that's at a length that would probably be between your waist and your chest, or some kind of a comfortable height. They'll just, if you've already got a trench dug, all you've got to do is put the pipe there, put the seed in, drop it, it goes straight where you want it to go. You also could, if you needed to dig a little bit, You probably could dig a little bit with the PVC pipe. I mean, you'd be rolling a big pipe between your hands. I don't know how comfortable that is. Another DIY, very similar thing. PVC pipe and funnel. It's just what it sounds like, a pipe, and then you put a funnel on top of it. Maybe not like maybe what you would use to put oil in your car, and you can put seed through there. Again, this is not going to work with every kind of seed or bulb, but for some it will work with that. Seed tapes, like Pam had just mentioned. I also read yesterday when I was looking up some things for this, that you can also make your own seed tape. If you don't have it, take some toilet paper, get it a little bit wet, drop the seed on it, kind of roll it up, and then the toilet paper is going to dissolve once it goes in the ground. But that way you can just go and drop your little papers along the row, and there's your planting. There's a bulb planter, and I have a picture of it over on the right. I actually have one of these, and I'm in Central Ohio, and I have this lousy Ohio clay. So this stuff is awesome. It's just a long metal pole, and I think it has a T-bar at the top, as I recall, just so you can kind of help to heft it down. At the bottom of it, it's got a big round cylinder, so it looks like a plant pot with no base on it. It's just a hollow cylinder, and then it's got a T-bar at the top of the cylinder for a footrest. So a pole with a T-bar, and then on front of the T-bar is attached this round cylinder. And you can see there's a pair of yellow boots stomping it into the ground in the picture. That's what you do. And our soil, sometimes I have to just almost make a jump on top of it. I don't suggest that, but I definitely stand on it and push, maybe 1 foot at a time, switch feet to get it in there because our ground is pretty hard. But it just pops out a perfect chunk of soil. You drop your bulb or your seed or whatever in, and Pam's probably cringing that I say that. I have a lot of daffodils, so it works. You should see them right now.
That does, you're right.
I have a ton of daffodils, which is impressive because squirrels didn't get to all of them, but we planted pretty much all of them with these bulb planters. These things are great. It's $30 as Amazon or Gempler's or someone. On the other side, I have it called a stand and plant. This is a little pricier. It's $110. It's definitely fancier. It looks like a long metal pipe. It's red and it has a handle coming off, and there's a lever. You can kind of see, I've got 3 pictures. So in the first one, you can see the cylindrical pipe, and then it's got the stationary handle that comes out at a right angle perpendicular for it. And then in front of that's a lever. So it's like a spray gun that you squeeze the lever, and that's how you would get it to go in. You drop your plant in the top of the cylinder, it goes down. And then I would say before you drop it, it has a mouth that looks like on the other end, it looks like a bird's beak. So it's kind of round and it's pointy. It's kind of rounded on the edges and pointed at the end. Looks a lot like a bird's beak, but you put that in the ground, you make your hole. And then I think if you had to use like the bulb planter to take a mouthful of dirt out, put it in, you've got your dirt, take your plant, you drop it down through the pipe, and then you squeeze the lever and it opens the plant and drops into the ground. I don't know how well these work. I don't own either one of them. I have seen the stand and plant at my AgAbility National Conference. They were auctioning one off. People seem pretty pleased with it. So that's one way you can get things into the ground without bending too much.
And the one at the bottom left there, the red one, is commonly used by commercial producers. As you can see there, they're planting it in the plastic when they're doing a lot of planting, just because of the fact that when you're bending down and planting hundreds and hundreds of things at a time, it makes it a lot easier. So it's used a lot commercially. Good,
especially at the price, that might be a home gardener thing, but definitely I can see commercially,
sure.
You can crank a lot out. Yeah.
Yep.
Next, please.
Do you really want to use toilet paper for seed tapes when it costs $20 for a small bundle?
Good point.
I mean, gosh, seed tapes are cheaper now, right?
If you get gifts and you get tissue paper with the gifts, you could use that.
Perfect. Good idea. All right. So in terms of planting, you want to fertilize at the time of planting. And one of the things to point out is a vegetable garden is a garden where you're removing plants every year, unless you have asparagus and Brussels or rhubarb, those plants that are perennial, they stay in year after year. But your tomatoes, your peppers, they're using nutrients as they grow all summer long. You're pulling them out and composting them. So you're removing nutrients from the soil. And research has shown that the average vegetable garden soil loses per 1,000 square foot 1 to 3 pounds of N or nitrogen, one and a half to 1.5 pound of P or phosphorus, and 2 to 4 pounds of K, not yearly, but over a lifetime. So you want to make sure that you're adding this back into the soil. And how do we know what we should add? The most important thing, and I mentioned this last time, is doing a soil test. On the right-hand side, you see several different types of garden fertilizers. I always encourage, and I emphasize this the last session, at least do one soil test so that you know what your base is, what your pH is, what your nutrients are, and you know what's needed to be added. You know, we're into this whole situation now with our waterways, our lakes having high phosphates, having nitrogen in them. We're blaming the farmers for all the runoff, but home gardeners rarely do a soil test, and we can be just as guilty for adding things that aren't necessarily needed in the garden. So I always encourage you to do at least once, that you know in the beginning of the season when you plant what you should be using. If you're not sure what to use a an all-purpose garden fertilizer, but follow the directions. Just because some is good doesn't mean more is better. So we really want to be conscientious about over-fertilizing and adding nutrients to the ground that aren't necessarily needed. And Laura mentioned earlier, as far as labeling, keep all your bottles labeled, keep all your chemicals labeled. And it's really a bad idea to put something in like a bucket or a 5-gallon jug that's a herbicide or fertilizer. It's best to leave it in its original packaging. And if you're going to put it in a small spray bottle, use that up, rinse that bottle properly, and leave it empty then after that. Planting and watering doesn't usually become a big problem. I've got some lettuce and some radishes growing in my raised bed, and we've had enough rain. We've had the right amount of soil moisture in the spring, so I haven't had to water. However, in 2010, the first time in like all the time I've gardened, we had a dry spring. I planted in early May. I put some seeds in, I put my tomatoes in, and I was dragging hoses in early May. So typically when we first plant them, we don't have to water right away. However, you want to make sure they get established. So that first week or two, particularly if you get those nice, warm, sunny days, you may have to water more often. Now, after that, it's probably 1 inch a week is about all you want to do, or want to be sure that you get to that. And when we get into the summer, we start talking more about maintenance. We'll talk about that 1 inch a week is what's recommended for best growth. So again, more early in the life cycle and less as they get into the season. But as they start producing, you want to pay attention to watering. And on the right-hand side, this is one of our community gardens that kind of cleverly rigged up an old chemical container. They filled it with water, and they put this little handle on here. And Laura showed this handle last time, and I believe she may show it again today, but it's just easier to utilize this type of handle to turn that on and off. So this is what they were using to water the community garden. In addition, as your produce is starting to grow, starting to come on, I want you to look at these numbers. An ear of corn is 70% water, a potato is 80% water, and a tomato is 95% water. If you're not watering during those times, those crucial times of production, these plants aren't going to grow good produce or good fruit. You know, the best peppers I've ever had are those years where it's kind of rainy or wet during the summer. If I get a July where we get good sufficient rain showers in early August, I have really thick walled peppers. But if I don't pay attention and make sure I keep the soil evenly moist all summer, my peppers will have thin walls and won't have that good sweet taste. So it's really important to understand why we have to water these plants, because they're high percentages of water. And watering typically is 1 inch of water per week, although not everybody hits that. But if you get a 1/2 inch of rain, then maybe you want to water again. But the key is even soil moisture so they don't dry out in between waterings. Again, when they get too dry, think about that tomato that's sitting there. It's nice and nice, getting pink, getting red. It's about ready to start, becoming ripe. You haven't watered in a while. The soil's dry. We get a good heavy rain shower, and boom, that thing splits because it gets too much water at one time. So keeping that even moisture throughout will prevent that splitting from occurring. Water in the morning and keep the foliage as dry as possible. These two are to help reduce potential disease problems. It is possible that you might increase the possibility of having leaf spots, bacterial leaf spots, and some of the other diseases, because if you water at night, the moisture is on the surface of the leaf all night long, and that increases and raises that opportunity for diseases to occur. Other methods: sprinkler, soaker hoses, drip irrigation, hand watering. Laura's going to share some other ideas, but I prefer a soaker hose if I possibly can, drip irrigation. And if I'm going to use a sprinkler, an overhead sprinkler, I make sure I set it up early in the morning and turn it off and not have it on in the early evening. And the sign at the top says the watering of a garden requires as much judgment as the seasoning of soup. And watering, people think, oh, watering's easy. It's not. You want to really make sure you hit it just right.
So talking about watering, Pam had already mentioned some soaker hoses. These are some ways to water that could make it easier. That could make it easier for you if you have a physical limitation, if you get fatigued easily. Water hoses are really heavy. Those big heavy rubber hoses are crazy heavy, bulky, hard to haul around. It would be, we have one that my husband will not get rid of, but this may be the year finally on this big trolley thing. I hate that thing. I've got 4 or 5 of these expandable hoses. I have 3 pictures up here far right. I've got a nice green hose coiled up. It's one of those expandable hoses. They feel like they're covered with fabric. When you hook that thing on and get it full of water, it is as good or better than a rubber hose. Those things are phenomenal. I pair it with that picture in the center is of a hand sprayer nozzle, and it has different settings like the mist and the stream and the shower and all those different things. Those are phenomenal. Get one. I got one. I had 2 or 3 last year. I had a really great one that you could squeeze it and had a little hook. I can't remember if you could lock the sprayer handle and you could lock it in the open position, or you had to put a little hook over it, but it was awesome because I could lock it open and just kind of very loosely hold the sprayer. I didn't have to grip it and squeeze it, because when I was watering my plants last year, I would go out in the morning. I was very good at that, but I would spend probably 30 minutes in the morning, especially in the summer when it quit raining, just watering everything, and gripping something for 30 minutes is exhausting. So I love those things where you can lock them open. Those things are awesome. And then my last thing that Pam had already mentioned was the little, it's called it's a little spigot that goes on, and instead of the wheel that you turn, that you have to grip and turn, it's got a lever bar. So something like that is nice. You could hit that with your, like the elbow, the side of your hand. It doesn't take a grip. It just takes a push to open and close it. Soaker hoses are nice. I have some that I probably need to get out. Probably not allowed to have them in my condo community, but I'll put them out anyway. I don't care. Irrigation systems in the ground, if you have those are wonderful. They're pricey. Expandable hoses, like I just mentioned, and then DIY solutions for drip and auto irrigation. I don't think I actually put these in the handout, because when I was looking at them, some of them can take quite a bit of kind of DIY know-how. Like you'll look, I encourage you to just look online, Google DIY watering, DIY water system. And some of them are as simple as a 2-liter bottle that's empty. You pop a cup, you poke a couple holes in the lid, you sort of fill it with water, flip it upside down, put it on some kind of a little stand, and the vacuum pressure of the water keeps it dripping slowly. Some of them are as complicated as welding, and so depending on your level of comfort with DIY, there are a lot of great suggestions out there. I did see a few suggestions for hand watering, some different pictures that are, they said if they're narrow, or like a narrow instead of round, they're easier to carry and easier to maneuver. And then a handle where there's a handle at the top that you could hold, but also then when you're tilting it, there's a separate handle. So kind of a segmented handle at the top, and then one in the back of it, so that when you're tipping it, and you're pouring it straight out, you're not struggling to keep the, your hand's not sliding on the handle. It's within that little section. Next, please. So protecting your elbows, shoulders, and back. Protecting your elbows and shoulders from damage caused by excessive twisting and reaching. So you don't really think about it, but reaching up over your head to tend hanging baskets, if you have an arbor, if you have something up high, that can really wear you out. Putting your hands over your head makes your heart beat faster. Apparently, I found that out in a workout class last night. But also it can just be really tiring and a good way to aggravate your shoulders. And a lot of us already have shoulders that get aggravated and don't need anything else. So minimize working with your hands above your shoulders, not to mention also if you're reaching up, you're going to be leaning your head back to look at what you're doing. That can really irritate your neck. So try to limit lifting, reaching, and pulling. I'd mentioned that before that I really like long-handled tools. They minimize the need to reach or stoop. And stretch. We talked about it more last week, but do some stretching before and during. And then I have a great picture here. Last, I think it was August, I went to Franklin Park Conservatory with my husband, and I was on the way out to take some pictures for people using raised beds. On the way out, I ran into a worker here who was watering, and she had this really long-handled water wand, and she's just standing at the edge of the bed. Her arm is held next to her in a pretty neutral, comfortable position. She's holding the water wand, but it's got to be what, 2 or 3 feet long. So she's getting in the middle of the bed. She doesn't have to walk into the bed, and there's no effort reaching her hand out so she can do it. So she had probably been watering all day and was going to keep watering all day, because I think we were there around noon or 1. But it's just a really nice setup to where you're not straining. She could also be watering things over her head without having to lift up high, just using that water wand. Next, please. So protecting your knees and feet. When we're talking about gardening, avoid working in awkward positions or standing for long periods of time. If you have a seat or a bench out there, if you have your rolling work seat, if you can just go inside and take a break. I would like to believe that this summer is going to be 75 or 80 degrees. I don't think it is. I think we might get that next week. And then who knows, it could be 100 degrees by the beginning of May. So take breaks. And I appreciate that someone had put in chat that last week when they were working in their garden, they were taking breaks because I reminded them to take breaks. So thank you. It's nice. It makes it nicer if you're not wearing yourself out. Avoid working in awkward positions or standing, putting all your weight on one hip, using your hands again a lot. Wear comfortable and supportive shoes with a good tread. I have a couple pictures on here. One of them on the far left is, I think it's called a garden slogger. It's like a rubber shoe. I have some of these, not this pattern, although that's very cute. But I wear them when I walk the dog or go out. They're pretty comfortable, but they're rubber and they have a great tread, a really thick tread. So don't underestimate how slippery the morning dew is when you're out there watering. I've had more people tell me at this point about them or their neighbors or someone that they know that slip and fell walking through the garden or walking down the steps off the porch. And sometimes they really, really hurt themselves. So think about the shoes that you're wearing. Again, sit down and work and conserve your energy. This is as much about enjoying yourself. It's not, please be kind to yourselves. I know that it's frustrating to get older and not have the same stamina and ability and strength, but there's so much more that comes with aging, all your wisdom and problem-solving skills, and perhaps being a little less concerned with what other people think. So that's a trade-off, maybe not that we all would have chosen, but it's what we got. So be kind to yourself with this. Sit down and conserve your energy. Work as much as you can and then just stop. Sit down and take a break. Use a kneeling bench if you're still comfortable kneeling. My second picture is of a woman. She's wearing white pants, which I don't know that I would wear those to garden, but you do you, lady. So she's kneeling on a kneeling bench, and it's the bench has two tall sides that stand up. It's hard to describe. It's kind of like a very long, elongated U, an upside down one. So it's got 2 long legs. It's got a straight bar at the top, and she's got her hand resting on one of those, and then she's watering or tending her garden in the other one when she's kneeling. So that keeps you from kneeling directly on the ground because it's padded. Also, once you're done with that, if you have trouble getting up, If you have the upper body strength, you can use those handles that are on either side of that kneeling bench to push yourself up. But there's quite a bit of upper body strength that goes along with that. So a couple of years ago, I was getting ready to do one of these presentations, and I'd asked, I can't think of who it was, but I asked her, is there anything you guys want me to cover? And she said, how do you get up once you get on the ground? Well, you need to have a plan before you get on the ground. If you get on the ground intentionally, before you intentionally sit or kneel down on the ground, know how you're going to get back up. Do you have the upper body strength to use this kneeler and push yourself up? If you don't, I'll be sitting down and I roll over, get up on my knees and push myself up from there. It's not the most graceful, but it's what works for me. I know that works. If you need something to pull yourself up, like a post, make sure you sit down next to one where you can pull yourself up. And I'm not being facetious. I know people sometimes fall and that's not planned, but if you're planning to get on the ground, make sure you know how you're going to get back up. Another thing with that kneeling bench, it also works as a seat. You can flip it over so that those are long legs and they sit on the ground, and then you can sit on the bench as if it was a regular bench. So it does work as kneeling or seating. Next pick, those are about $40. The next picture over is of that rolling work seat I'd talked about before with the padded backrest and the tool belts. And the last one is a 5-gallon bucket. It has a name and I can't think what it's called, but it's on the garden tools handout. It's a 5-gallon bucket full of beans, and it has a black lid, but the black lid does not snap onto the bucket. It has 3 or 4 arms that come off of it that clip onto the top of the bucket. So it looks like a stool. So you can sit on that stool if you'd like to. You can sit on it and pick beans and drop them into the bucket that's underneath your seat, or you can stand next to it, however. But there's a couple nice things about that. For one thing, when it's full, you need to go in and dump out all the beans or the weeds or the whatever you're picking. So it does set a time limit on you so that you take breaks and kind of check in with yourself. I will say that I'm not sure I have the balance to sit on that and lean forward and do any kind of work. I don't trust myself to do that. So make sure you also have some good balance that you can keep yourself stable and not fall off of it. Next, please.
Yeah, and Laura, we'll use with our volunteers, we collect 5-gallon buckets or kitty litter buckets, and they're a real cheap thing to turn upside down and set on that way.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a great idea.
Litter buckets too.
Great. I'm going to chime in here for just a second and give you all an opportunity to share any strategies that you use or any tools that you've come across. So Laura and Pam have presented some ideas for you to consider. Maybe you have other things though that you do, or just share with us in general. What do you do to make gardening enjoyable and reduce the strain on your body when working in the garden? For me, I have bad knees, I have a bad lower back, and I also have chronic neck pain. So I have to do certain things to make sure that I'm taking care of my body. So in the chat, whether it's just stretching or you have a special tool that you use, we'd like to hear from you. Penny, yes, I often sit on the ground and work too. That tends to be better for my knees. Great. Drink lots of water. I'm also going to take the opportunity while you chime in what you do to take care of yourself and just point out a couple of questions that have come up. One in particular is relevant to today. Someone asked about planting onions or radishes. Any suggestions? And Pamela said, the key is loose, well-drained soil. Since these are root crops, they don't grow well in compacted clay soil. So soil prep is coming up, so stay tuned for that. And then the other one is about pest management. And keep in mind, pest management is coming in our garden maintenance webinar, which is our next session. We're going to have another, I'm an entomologist, by the way. I didn't mention that earlier, but I don't specialize in pest management. But we will have someone who specializes in pest management join us for our garden maintenance session next time, so session 3. And this question was addressing anthills. And unfortunately, with anthills, you could mechanically destroy it, but that's only a temporary solution. Most likely they will return. So unfortunately, oftentimes the only reliable scientific way to control ants is through chemical control. So, but again, we'll talk more about pest control in the next session. So yeah, if you have additional questions, please remember to use the Q&A feature. Let's see what you're saying. Stretching, padded. Yes, I've used knee pads before, the ones you actually wear on your knees, and those are very helpful for knee pain. Sunscreen, very important, especially if you are on medications or something that makes you more susceptible to reactions to the sun. Make sure that you're caring for your skin. Oh, someone really likes the curved trowel. Great. Do more mulching to reduce weeding. That's great. So yeah, vented hats with vents. Yes, those are great. Wonderful. Yes, keep your suggestions coming because we might actually add those to our presentation if you come up with something that we didn't cover. I'm going to pass it back to my colleagues.
Yeah, that's one thing. You know, people are very ingenious. They come up with really great things. And that's where Laura, I know she's picked up some of her stuff. I've picked up stuff on staking. I mean, other people come up with great ideas. We're talking about the science behind things. But boy, we like your ideas and things that you're talking about. On the knee pads, I like the ones, I bought a pair one time and they're like a hard foam and they're really uncomfortable. Then I got another pair that had the straps that go behind the back. The ones I like the most were like the knee pads that I used to wear for volleyball. You know, they're soft and they've got that kind of, I don't know, it's not rubber, but you just pull them up all over your pants. And I actually have to use them because my knees get so filthy dirty that if I don't use them, the stains don't come out. But some things, you know, are definitely more comfortable than others. So great ideas. So let's talk a little bit about fertilizing. And with fertilizing, you should have fertilized at planting according to your recommendation. And then when it comes to actual growth time and they're starting to produce, there is important steps that you need to take for specific species. And I'll share that here in a second. There are different methods of doing it. So side dressing is where you're just taking the fertilizer right along the side of that row. In this picture, you see a row of okra, and you would just take and lay the fertilizer at the side of the row. Row or banding is very similar to that. You can broadcast it, and sometimes at planting, I will do that. I'll use the proper amount per 1,000 square foot, and I'll just go ahead and broadcast it over the entire garden and rake that in. And then as I'm tilling and digging the holes, I'm incorporating that down into the soil. And you can use liquid if you prefer. Now, I would say in the garden, it's a lot easier to use the granular. With the liquid, you want to make sure you pour it around the base of the plant for the roots. There's little research that there's research that shows very little uptake of nutrients through the foliage. And I know a lot of people like to use the hose-in sprayer and spray fertilizer on the plants. That really isn't as beneficial because the foliage just does not take up a lot of that nutrition. So there's different ways you can do it. But in terms of timing, here's an example of when you need to fertilize specific species. And I make sure I go in and kind of know, I have like a little list or a little chart like this, you know, beets at the time of planting, and then when they're about 3 inches high, carrots when they're seeding 3 to 4 inches tall, and again, 6 to 8 inches tall, eggplant at the time of planting, and it likes nitrogen after the fruit sets, peas planting and after the pods form, peppers planting and after fruit sets. So if you have questions about specifics on fertilizing, particularly if you're trying to get the maximum out of that crop, read up about that on some of our fact sheets. ohioline.osu.edu has quite a few fact sheets on growing specific plants, specific crops. So you can go to that website and see what they need in terms of specific fertilizing times. If you're growing in containers, and we talked about this the last time when we were talking about container growth, you're using a soilless mix. Typically, it doesn't have sand, silt, and clay. Clay soil particles hold on to the nutrients. So if you're not using, you know, a regular in-ground soil, you're going to have to fertilize on a regular basis because those plants are surrounded by that container. The water leaches any nutrients through, and nutrients just don't stick around for a long time. So you need to make sure if you're growing in containers or a raised bed and you're using that soilless mix, make sure you're watering or you're fertilizing rather on a regular basis. A couple things to think about when you're fertilizing: never fertilize when the soil is dry. Fertilizer is a salt. And if you put the fertilizer on when the soil is dry and the roots are dry and they're drying out, The water is absorbed from the plant by that salt, higher salt content in the soil. So you want to make sure that it's been at least a little damp out. I try to do it, especially before a really good rain. If it's going to rain, I try to put it down so it really works that fertilizer into the soil. Avoid contact with foliage, particularly on a sunny day. If you sprinkle or broadcast your fertilizer and you get it on the foliage, make sure you just kind of go in. I just kind of take a light plastic leaf rake and kind of knock it off so all the fertilizer goes down to the soil. Otherwise, it could burn the foliage. And then in terms of the question about, do I use organic or synthetic? This is entirely up to you. It depends on what your preferences are. There's a lot of good synthetic fertilizers out there. They're very safe to use. They're nutrients that the plants need. And it depends on if you like to use those. If you are going to use organic, understand that organic fertilizers are slower to break down. Manures are a type of organic fertilizer, and it just takes a little bit longer for it to break down and be available to the plant. Same thing with blood meal and some of the other organics that you might use. So it just takes a little bit longer, but it's purely your choice whether you want to use organic fertilizer or a synthetic fertilizer. And of course, always, always, always when you're applying fertilizer, wear gloves and apply according to label directions. None of this reaching into the bag with your hand and just kind of spraying it out everywhere. Follow those directions. Here's an example of something Laura was talking about earlier. If you look closely right here in this photo, we've got 4 of our volunteers. We are actually not planting vegetables. We're planting our cultivar trial plots for our research. They've got the PVC pipe that was cut at an angle. So it's got a little bit of an angle, so it has a point, kind of like that one red tool Laura showed that had the pointy, looks like a bird's beak. And then we duct tape a funnel to the top. So instead of our volunteers having to get down on their knees, I mean, we're planting more than 2,000 plants. So we're fertilizing every single plant. Instead of them getting down on their knees and scooping out a tablespoon of fertilizer, Nathita has this wrapped around her waist, and that's the bucket of fertilizer. She puts just a little bit in there so it's not too heavy. She scoops out a tablespoon. She puts that in the hole. The board is just for us to measure. She puts that in the hole and it drops right down and hits that spot. Then we go back in the next day and plant. So this is a really good example. And Leo, I did tell a fib. We're not talking about soil prep tonight because we talked about soil prep last time. But the one thing to improve any soil, clay soil, sandy soil, is add organic matter. And you can add organic matter at the time of planting, and it's the best thing to improve and incorporate that into your garden to improve drainage, improve water holding capacity in sandy soils, but also improve aeration and the oxygen space for good root growth. So I apologize for saying that we would talk about that tonight. This probably is the worst thing about gardening for me, is trying to figure out how to stake things and what kind of staking kit to use and when to stake them, because staking is a good cultural practice. It keeps plants up off the ground. It keeps them clean. It keeps good air circulation in between the rows. You want good air circulation. When we start talking about pest control, we're going to talk about diseases, and we're going to talk about, that good air circulation. So staking is going to be really important for a lot of plants. Tomatoes, to me, they're a pain every year I try to stake. I've bought tomato cages. I've bought all different kinds of things. So anything that you use for staking, and I would suggest any kind of recommendations of what you use as well, because it is a pain. So upper left, you see peas, and we've got some 4x4 kind of a netting that's attached to these stakes. And my husband has gone out and purchased the pipe that's used for conduit. It's called conduit pipe, I guess. And he cuts it into pieces, and we pound that in the ground. And that's been really good in terms of holding up stuff, and it's pretty sturdy. You've got your T stakes here with your wire, 4x4 inch wire along there so they grow up. The bottom is an old fashioned way of staking. They used to do it all the time in England, and that's where you just use, it's called pea staking, where you use branches and trimmings that you might be doing right now, cuttings from your trees, prunings. You stick them in the ground before everything starts to grow, and then the plants just kind of grow up in and among those and kind of get staked naturally. Or, you've got tomato stakes, you've got cages, but culturally, staking is really a very good practice to help keep your vegetables clean. And it also will help improve the production that you get. Another cultural practice that everybody hates is pest control. Jen Anden, the entomologist that Leo was referring to, is going to come in the summer months and talk about some of the pest control processes. A pest is anything that causes a problem in your garden. So it could be a weed, it could be an insect, it could be a slug, it could be the next door neighbor's kid who comes running through the lettuce patch every time his basketball goes astray. Anything that, you know, is causing a problem. Now, of course, we're not going to do much control on a kid coming through your garden. You're going to have to talk to the parents, but there are a variety of methods that Jen is going to talk about this summer. Weed control, my big mantra, do not let weeds go to seed. Absolutely, amen. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you look at this goosegrass right here, this is not goosegrass, this is one of the grassy weeds. If you look at that and look at the number of seed heads that are on the end of that, when that goes to seed, all that's going to do is give you trouble for the next year. Right now in your gardens, you're probably seeing some things like hairy bittercress, henbit, spotted dead nettle, chickweed, all the winter annuals. They came up last fall. They're growing right now. They'll flower and go to seed quickly when it gets warm, and then they'll die out during the summer. And you may think, well, that's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal because every time they go to seed, they just increase your seed bank. So try to get them out right now as much as possible. My favorite tool for weeding, of course, is going to be the garden hoe. And I think, Laura, I'm going to try to get me one of those handles to put on this, but this triangle hoe is my favorite, particularly for small weeds, because you just scuffle it back and forth and it will cut underneath and cut the roots off. And if you do that kind of like in the morning and it's a warm sunny day, they'll dry out quickly. So weed control is really important, but above all, if you don't learn anything else from today, don't let your weeds go to seed. And then dead leafing is also another good cultural practice, removing those infected leaves. These leaves on the Brussels sprouts on the bottom left, the yellow ones have been chewed up by the cabbage caterpillars. When they get to that point, they're really harboring pests. They're not beneficial to the plant. So removing any infected or affected leaves if they have any kind of disease or insect problems on them.
So I have a few weeding tools. I do not own any of these, but I found them on several websites when I was doing some searching, and I've heard other people say they like them. There's one called a Skidger. It's an ergonomic garden weed removal tool. It's $40, and it's got a long pole, and at the end of it is kind of like a teardrop shape with the point of the teardrop facing down, and it's got flat metal, so it's hollow. The metal is on the outside. It's hard to describe it, but it's got like a flat metal outline, and then it comes together at the bottom of the teardrop, and it makes a little kind of like a pointy scoop. So Pam was saying she likes her pointy hoe. This works a lot like that. And also when I've watched videos of it, they use that, they lay it down so that the pointy side is up, and they kind of scrape across, then they flip it over and they dig with the pointy side. And then they've also got a photo of it here. They're digging some stuff out of a crack in the sidewalk, but it looked like a pretty neat one. You could get into some pretty narrow areas. I don't remember the handle being especially ergonomic, but again, one of those $10 add-ons would probably make a really big difference. And then I've got two others. One's called the Walensee Weed Puller, and then there's Grandpa's Weeder Weed Remover, and they're pretty similar looking. So they're both a long pole with a T at the top of it. So for you to kind of use it to push down. At the base of both of them, they have two or three prongs, and then they have a piece that comes straight off the pole, and then perpendicular at about a right angle from that, there's like a footrest. So I watched the video for the Grandpa's today. You put it in the ground, and you should have seen the yard that they were showing. It was full of dandelions, and I personally think dandelions are pretty, but that's just me. It would have taken a long time for Grandpa to remove all those weeds, but they went straight down with it, and then they kind of stepped on it or just tilted it, and that right angle piece gives it a little bit of extra pull. So then you pull it up, and the dandelion is inside there. Although I seem to remember commercials that said dandelion roots were like a mile long. So I don't know how helpful, but if it's not too terribly long of a weed, it does take it out pretty well. And the Walensee Weed Puller works about the same way. It has prongs, and you can pull those up like that. using a hoe. And they're long handle tools, so you could use them from a seated position if you have your work seat, or if you're in a mobility device or a scooter, or you can't kneel down, but that would be a good way to do those.
Yeah, you made a good point, Laura. Your dandelions, your thistles, those things with those thick tap roots, they are going to come back if you pull it up with one of these. But the key is you can keep up with it, and each time it comes back, pull it again, because eventually you're going to starve that plant. So the key with your thistles and dandelions, things like that, is multi-pronged. You could use something like this, but then you could also hit the new growth with a herbicide if you don't mind using, herbicides. But because that thick, taproot is just huge, it has lots of food storage, whatever pieces you leave, it'll come back. But if you keep doing that, think about it, every time it comes back, it's going to lose some of that energy. So don't let it grow and flourish and refeed that root again. Keep after it, and you can eventually get them with something like this. So we're getting close here, folks. Harvesting is a cultural practice, and if you don't do it, the plants are just going to stop growing. Annual plants, their whole purpose is to go from seed to seed in one season. So their life cycle is start the seed in the beginning, at the end of the season when it hits a frost, they have gone to seed, and they can produce that entire species over again from the seed. So tomatoes, for instance, have what we call determinate and indeterminate plants. Now that's going to be a little different because tomatoes that are determinate grow to a certain height. They'll start to ripen from the bottom up, but they're not going to get much taller. So they kind of give you one big crop, not all at once, but a little bit after the other, and then they're not going to give you any more. Indeterminate tomatoes, however, will just keep growing. So the higher you stake them, the wider you stake them, they're just going to keep giving and producing. Green beans, if you harvest those on a regular basis, you'll get them to continue to produce because they're wanting to go to seed. So you can get extra production from some of your plants by harvesting on a regular basis. Same thing with some of our greens. This is Swiss chard on the left-hand side. And by harvesting those outside stems, you're going to continue to get inside growth for as long as the weather stays cool. Swiss chard doesn't really like it hot. It's more of a cool loving plant. And like I said, on tomatoes that are indeterminate tomatoes, you keep harvesting them and you're going to keep getting good plant production. So harvesting is an important part of cultural practices in having that vegetable garden. And I'm going to finish here with a promotion, a shameless promotion of our agenda. Ohio State University Extension is working with the Ohio Department of Agriculture on the Ohio Victory Garden program. And the director of ODA came to us last year and really wanted to encourage people to grow vegetables. Of course, last year with the pandemic, we saw people just explode in terms of the numbers of people growing vegetables. So we're hoping to capture that and to keep people interested in growing their own vegetables through the Ohio Victory Garden program. If you go to the website u.osu.edu/Ohio Victory Gardens, and Leo typed it into the chat, you will find where we're doing the seed distribution, and you can locate your county. Click on your county and find out if they're going to be one of the 25 counties who are giving seeds, and also if when they're going to be doing it. Next week is our big push on distributing these seeds. My county, Clark County, for instance, we're giving them away on Wednesday morning from 9 to noon at our Snyder Park Gardens and Arboretum. And down on the bottom left-hand corner, you see a packet. We have a sign so that you can put in and say you have a victory garden. You see samples of seeds. You'll get a spring growing crop. You'll get a summer growing crop, and you're getting sunflowers so that everybody can help our pollinators. And on the right-hand side, you can see one of our volunteers who's helping distribute those packets so that everybody can get information about growing vegetables. That website is also being populated with good information, good resources on growing vegetables as well. So if you haven't gotten enough information from us on growing vegetables, you can go to that site for more information.
We have some resources posted on the AgAbility website. I have a lot of handouts and videos about fitness for farm life, the stretching, safe lifting, the garden resources. I have several different videos on, I have some on accessible agritourism, farming and gardening with disability, a few more gardening with arthritis, like this type of video. not as much great info about the gardening. And then eventually I will also post this video on that.
Great, next slide. Excellent. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you learned something new, and thank you for your participation and the contribution that you folks made to the chat. Please take a few moments after we log off here and complete the survey. You can either take a photo of the QR code, or I just put the link in chat. Like I said earlier in chat, I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone containing the handout again in case you missed it, and any other resources that my colleagues would like to share with you. At this time, just want to point out we did get a couple other questions in the Q&A, so this would be a good opportunity for you to check those out. A couple of them were about weed control, so using the landscape fabric versus mulch, and I think it's boils down to probably personal preference in some cases, also ease of use. I find landscape fabric to be just annoyingly complicated, and it's much easier to just throw down mulch.
Very.
And also, as Pamela pointed out, you could put fabric down, but then seeds can drop on the fabric and germinate there, and then you get weeds even if you've got the fabric. And also, plants can grow through the fabric. I've seen that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Someone mentioned something about shredded paper. You could use shredded paper, but Pamela points out you might want to put down straw because paper tends to dry out and fly everywhere. So that could be a bit messy. And then there's a question about fertilizing, and Pamela answered, you can fertilize up next to the plants for best results, keeping it off the foliage. Again, you want to keep in mind that fertilizers are salts, as Pamela pointed out, and they will damage the plant if it gets on there. It will suck out that moisture.
The biggest thing that I have to emphasize is if people would read the labels of products, they're not going to have problems because it's all right there. It's tested, it's proven. And if you follow those label directions, you're going to be spot on.
I use a product, and the name of it is escaping me, and one of you might be able to think of it. It's a slow release. It's in little pellets.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the nice thing about that is that you actually put it in the hole when you put the plant in the hole.
Yep.
Because it's slow release, it's not going to damage the roots if they come into contact right away. It feeds for up to 3 months, and I don't have to think about it for a while.
Like this right here. I had a program last night.
Osmocote, yes.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, and this is kind of expensive for a big garden. So if you have a big garden, you might want to look at like a 25, 50-pound bag of 5-10-5 or 5-10-10, triple 12. But this is great for a small garden, or especially for containers, because it backs you up so that if you forget, it's going to be taken care of it all summer long. And you can get it in 90 days, 120 days. There's different days as well that it's going to last. But yeah, it's a great product.
That's the other thing that you reminded me when you were talking about reading the labels, because you need to also understand, is this an immediate release type fertilizer where it's going to be immediately available to the plant, or is it going to be slow and over time?
Mm-hmm.
Because you could shock the plant if you put way too much fertilizer in and it's immediately available. So if we're happy to stay on for a few minutes. It's only 7:35. If you have to go, feel free to log off. And thank you again for coming. We have no, that's just a comment. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box, since we are no longer talking at the same time. If you don't have any questions, then we hope that you have a great evening, and we hope to see you again for the next session.